When Private First Class Sarah Chen walked into the mess hall at Fort Campbell, carrying a tray of standard military rations, the last thing anyone expected was for her to become the center of the most talked-about incident in the 101st Airborne Division's recent history. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning would end with a captain requiring medical attention, 178 soldiers as witnesses, and Sarah's quiet reputation transformed into something approaching legend. The morning Kentucky sun filtered through the mess hall windows as Sarah navigated between tables filled with soldiers from various units stationed at Fort Campbell. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At first glance, she appeared to be exactly what her personnel file suggested, a 22-year-old communications specialist from San Francisco standing 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Her uniform was regulation perfect, her black hair pulled back in the standard military bun, and her demeanor carried the quiet professionalism that characterized most successful enlisted personnel. What none of the soldiers in that mess hall knew was that Sarah Chen carried secrets that would have fundamentally changed how they perceived her presence among them. Her personnel file, like those of many military members, told only the most basic story. Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents, graduated high school with honors, enlisted in the Army at 18, completed basic training and advanced individual training for communications, assigned to Fort Campbell 6 months earlier. Standard information that revealed nothing about the extraordinary background that had shaped her into someone far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Sarah had grown up in San Francisco's Richmond district, in a community where her family's history was both honored and carefully concealed. Her grandfather, Chen Wei, had been a master of traditional Chinese martial arts, specifically specializing in combat techniques that had been developed for warfare rather than sport or demonstration. These were not the flowing meditative practices that most Americans associated with martial arts, but brutal, efficient methods designed to disable opponents quickly and permanently. Chen Wei had immigrated to the United States in 1962, carrying with him knowledge that had been passed down through generations of his family, techniques that had been refined during centuries of conflict in regions where survival depended on the ability to eliminate threats with precision and speed. He had settled in San Francisco and opened a small import business, never advertising his martial arts background, never seeking students, and certainly never revealing the deadly capabilities he possessed. Sarah's introduction to her grandfather's knowledge had begun when she was 7 years old, not through any formal decision to teach her martial arts, but as a response to a playground incident where older children had targeted her for bullying. Chen Wei had observed the situation and made a quiet decision that his granddaughter would never be helpless against those who sought to harm her. The training that followed was unlike anything taught in commercial martial arts schools. Chen Wei focused on techniques that assumed Sarah would always be smaller and physically weaker than any potential attacker, methods that used an opponent's size and strength against them while targeting vulnerable points that could disable or incapacitate regardless of the size differential. These were not techniques designed for competition or demonstration, but for survival against overwhelming odds. For 15 years, Sarah had trained with her grandfather in the basement of his San Francisco home, learning not just physical techniques, but the mental discipline required to remain calm under extreme pressure. Chen Wei had taught her to read body language and recognize aggressive intent before it manifested in action, to control her own emotional responses so that fear or anger wouldn't compromise her judgment, and to strike with precision that could end confrontations before they truly began. The training had been conducted in complete secrecy. Chen Wei had made it clear that the techniques he was teaching were not for casual use, not for settling ordinary disputes, and certainly not for demonstration to friends or classmates. They were tools of last resort, to be employed only when Sarah faced genuine threats to her safety or the safety of others. The knowledge came with responsibility that Chen Wei impressed upon her with the gravity of someone who understood the consequences of such capabilities. Sarah's decision to join the military had surprised her grandfather, who had hoped she would pursue civilian career paths that wouldn't place her in situations where her training might become relevant. But he had also understood that military service could provide her with additional skills and opportunities while potentially keeping her away from the kinds of urban violence that had originally motivated him to teach her defensive techniques. During basic training and advanced individual training, Sarah had been careful to perform at levels that demonstrated competence without revealing exceptional capability. She completed physical fitness requirements with scores that were good but not outstanding, performed adequately in hand-to-hand combat training without displaying techniques that would have raised questions about her background, and generally maintained the profile of a dedicated but unremarkable soldier. Her assignment to Fort Campbell as a communications specialist had seemed perfect for maintaining the low profile that Chen Wei had taught her to value. Communications work was technical and important, but it typically kept personnel away from direct combat situations and the kinds of confrontations where her grandfather's training might become necessary. Sarah had hoped to complete her enlistment, gain valuable technical experience, and transition to civilian career opportunities without ever having to employ the dangerous knowledge she carried. The mess hall where Sarah now sat was filled with soldiers from multiple units, creating a social environment that reflected the complex dynamics of military life. The 101st Airborne Division was known for its high standards and esprit de corps, but like any large military installation, Fort Campbell also contained individuals whose behavior fell short of the Army's stated values. Most soldiers conducted themselves professionally, but the combination of young adults, military hierarchy, and traditional masculine culture occasionally produced situations where power was misused and inappropriate behavior was overlooked or minimized. Sarah had observed these dynamics during her 6 months at Fort Campbell, noting how some male soldiers, particularly those in leadership positions, treated female personnel with attitudes that ranged from condescending paternalism to outright harassment. She had witnessed incidents where female soldiers were subjected to unwanted attention, inappropriate comments, and behavior that violated both military regulations and basic human decency. Most female soldiers dealt with such situations through official channels when possible, or by developing informal support networks that provided protection through group solidarity. Sarah had generally avoided problems by maintaining professional distance, focusing on her technical duties, and avoiding social situations where inappropriate behavior was most likely to occur. Captain Mark Davidson represented everything problematic about the attitudes Sarah had observed during her time at Fort Campbell. At 28 years old, Davidson carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never faced serious consequences for his actions. His personnel record showed a pattern of behavior that skirted the edges of official misconduct without quite crossing lines that would trigger formal disciplinary action. Davidson commanded a transportation company within the division, a position that provided him with authority over approximately 150 soldiers while keeping him away from the intense scrutiny that combat units typically faced. His leadership style relied heavily on intimidation and favoritism, creating an environment where soldiers under his command learned to avoid drawing his attention rather than seeking to excel in their duties. Female soldiers in Davidson's unit had developed unofficial strategies for dealing with his behavior, which included unwanted physical contact disguised as casual interaction, comments about their appearance that violated professional boundaries, and the kind of persistent attention that created hostile work environments. Most incidents were subtle enough to make formal complaints difficult, while those who did report problems found their concerns minimized or dismissed by Davidson's superiors, who preferred to avoid the administrative complications that harassment investigations created. Sarah had heard stories about Davidson from other female soldiers, warnings passed along through informal networks that helped women avoid potentially dangerous situations. The consensus was that Davidson was someone to be avoided when possible, and endured when avoidance wasn't an option. Most soldiers assumed that dealing with his behavior was simply part of military life, an unpleasant reality that had to be accepted rather than challenged. What none of Davidson's victims or potential victims understood was that Sarah Chen was fundamentally different from anyone else he had encountered during his military career. Her grandfather's training had prepared her not just to defend herself, but to recognize and respond to threats before they escalated into situations where other forms of intervention might be necessary. Chen Wei had taught her that predatory behavior followed predictable patterns, and that early intervention could prevent escalation that might require more dramatic responses. The Tuesday morning when everything changed began like any other day in Sarah's routine. She had completed her early morning physical training, showered and dressed in her duty uniform, and reported to the communications center for the first shift of technical duties that comprised most of her daily responsibilities. Her work involved maintaining radio equipment, monitoring communication networks, and providing technical support for various training exercises conducted by units throughout the base. Sarah's technical competence had earned her the respect of both her immediate supervisors and the soldiers who depended on reliable communications equipment for their training and operations. She approached her duties with the same attention to detail and quiet professionalism that characterized everything she did, completing tasks efficiently while avoiding the kind of attention that might complicate her military service. The mess hall represented a necessary social obligation rather than something Sarah particularly enjoyed. Military regulations required soldiers to maintain themselves in proper physical condition, which meant regular meals even when personal preference might have suggested alternatives. Sarah typically ate quickly and quietly, reading technical manuals or catching up on personal correspondence while consuming the calories necessary to support her physical training requirements. On this particular morning, the mess hall was more crowded than usual due to schedule changes related to training exercises that had required modified meal times for several units. The increased crowd meant that tables filled quickly and soldiers were forced to sit with personnel they might not normally interact with, creating social dynamics that were less predictable than usual. Sarah had selected a table near the back of the mess hall, positioned where she could observe the room while maintaining relative privacy for reading the communications manual she carried. The location also provided easy access to the exit, a habit Chen Wei had taught her as a basic security precaution in any unfamiliar environment. She had settled into her routine of eating efficiently while studying technical procedures when she became aware of Captain Davidson's presence in the mess hall. Davidson moved through the room with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any gathering, stopping at various tables to engage in conversations that were clearly intended to demonstrate his position and importance. His interactions with male soldiers were characterized by the kind of forced camaraderie that superior officers sometimes use to maintain morale, while his behavior toward female personnel was noticeably different in ways that made several women visibly uncomfortable. Sarah watched Davidson's progress through the mess hall with the analytical attention that Chen Wei had taught her to apply to potentially threatening situations. Her grandfather had emphasized the importance of recognizing predatory behavior before it directly targeted her, understanding that early awareness provided more options for response than waiting until a threat became immediate and unavoidable. Davidson's body language and interaction patterns displayed characteristics that Chen Wei had taught Sarah to identify as warning signs of someone who used authority to exploit others. His positioning relative to female soldiers involved unnecessary proximity. His conversations included physical contact that appeared casual but served to establish dominance, and his overall demeanor suggested someone who was testing boundaries to determine what behavior he could pursue without facing consequences. When Davidson's attention turned toward Sarah's table, she recognized the shift in his focus with the clarity that came from years of training in situational awareness. His approach was casual and seemingly coincidental, but his route through the mess hall had been deliberately calculated to bring him to her location. Sarah set down her technical manual and prepared herself for an interaction that she hoped would remain professional but suspected might require more dramatic intervention. Davidson's approach to Sarah's table followed the pattern of behavior that had made him problematic for other female soldiers throughout his career. He arrived with the casual authority of superior rank, positioning himself in a way that demonstrated his power while creating physical proximity that most people would find uncomfortable. His opening comments were superficially appropriate but carried undertones that established his interest in Sarah as something beyond professional courtesy. "Private Chen, isn't it?" Davidson said, settling into the chair across from Sarah without waiting for invitation. "I don't think we've been formally introduced. I'm Captain Davidson, Transportation Company Commander." His tone carried the expectation of deference that he was accustomed to receiving from subordinate personnel, while his positioning and body language suggested intentions that extended beyond simple introduction. Sarah responded with the military courtesy that regulations required while maintaining the emotional detachment that Chen Wei had taught her to preserve during potentially threatening encounters. "Yes, sir, I'm assigned to communications." Her answer was factually accurate and professionally appropriate while providing no encouragement for continued interaction. Davidson's response demonstrated the persistence that characterized his problematic behavior patterns. Rather than accepting Sarah's polite but distant response as a signal to conclude the interaction, he treated it as an opening for escalated attention. Communications right. Important work. I imagine you spend a lot of time working alone with all that technical equipment. His comment was ostensibly about her professional duties, but the emphasis and tone suggested interests that had nothing to do with military communications. Sarah recognized Davidson's approach as a classic pattern of predatory behavior that her grandfather had described during their training sessions. Chen Wei had explained how individuals who used position and authority to exploit others typically began with seemingly innocent interactions that gradually escalated until their true intentions became unavoidable. The key to effective response was recognizing the pattern early and establishing boundaries before the situation progressed to more dangerous levels. I work with a team, sir, Sarah replied, deliberately emphasizing the collaborative nature of her duties while maintaining professional distance. Her response was designed to discourage Davidson's apparent assumption that she might be isolated or vulnerable while providing him with an opportunity to conclude the interaction gracefully. Davidson's reaction to Sarah's response revealed both his persistence and his misunderstanding of the situation he was creating. Rather than recognizing her professional boundaries, he interpreted her answers as a form of resistance that needed to be overcome through increased pressure and demonstration of his authority. This was exactly the kind of escalation that Chen Wei had warned Sarah to expect from predatory individuals who were accustomed to using power to achieve their objectives.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Well, I'm sure your team appreciates having someone as dedicated as you working with them, Davidson said, his tone shifting to something more personal and inappropriate. As he spoke, he reached across the table in what appeared to be a gesture of friendly emphasis, but which was actually an attempt to make physical contact that would establish dominance and test Sarah's willingness to accept inappropriate behavior. The moment Davidson's hand moved toward Sarah represented the transition from uncomfortable social interaction to genuine threat. Chen Wei had taught her to recognize this specific type of escalation as a critical decision point where decisive action could prevent a situation from progressing to assault. Everything in Davidson's approach suggested that he was accustomed to female soldiers accepting his inappropriate behavior either because they feared professional retaliation or because they had been conditioned to believe that such treatment was inevitable. Sarah's response was immediate, precise and devastating in its effectiveness. As Davidson's hand reached toward her, she moved with the fluid speed that Chen Wei had drilled into her through thousands of hours of practice. Her left hand intercepted Davidson's wrist with a grip that utilized specific pressure points to cause immediate pain and temporary paralysis, while her right hand struck his elbow with exactly the force and angle necessary to hyperextend the joint beyond its normal range of motion. The entire sequence lasted less than 2 seconds and resulted in Davidson's wrist being trapped in a position that caused excruciating pain while preventing him from using his arm for any purposeful movement. The technique was one that Chen Wei had taught Sarah specifically for situations where she needed to disable an attacker quickly while maintaining control over the level of damage inflicted. The sound of Davidson's wrist breaking was clearly audible throughout the mess hall, a sharp crack that immediately drew the attention of every soldier present. The captain's cry of pain and shock followed immediately, a sound that combined physical agony with complete surprise at finding himself suddenly and helplessly restrained by someone he had assumed was helpless. The mess hall fell completely silent as 178 soldiers turned to stare at the unprecedented sight of a private first class holding their company commander in a restraint that was obviously causing him significant pain. Davidson's face had gone white with shock and agony, while his attempts to free himself only increased the pressure on his damaged wrist and elbow. Sarah maintained her grip for exactly long enough to ensure that Davidson understood the futility of resistance, then released him with the same controlled precision she had used to apply the restraint. Davidson's arm fell limply to his side, clearly damaged and requiring immediate medical attention, while his expression showed a combination of pain, shock, and dawning realization that he had seriously misjudged the situation. "Sir," Sarah said in a voice that carried clearly through the silent mess hall, "I would appreciate it if you would keep your hands to yourself." Her tone was respectful and military appropriate, but it carried an undertone of authority that made it clear she was prepared to escalate her response if Davidson's behavior continued. The silence that followed Sarah's statement stretched for what seemed like minutes but was probably only seconds, as every person in the mess hall processed what they had just witnessed. A junior enlisted soldier had just disabled a company commander using techniques that appeared professional and controlled, responding to behavior that was clearly inappropriate but which most soldiers had learned to ignore or endure. Davidson struggled to his feet, cradling his damaged wrist against his chest while his face showed the kind of pain that indicated serious injury. His attempts to reassert authority were undermined by his obvious physical distress and the shocked attention of every soldier in the room. "You can't," he began, but his voice trailed off as he realized that Sarah had already demonstrated exactly what she could do. Sarah remained seated at her table, her expression calm and professional as she watched Davidson realize that his usual tactics for intimidating subordinates were completely ineffective against someone with her capabilities. Her grandfather had taught her that the moments immediately following defensive action were often as important as the initial response, requiring controlled confidence that demonstrated readiness for further escalation while providing opportunities for de-escalation if the threat recognized defeat. The crowd of soldiers watching the confrontation included personnel from multiple units and ranks, creating a situation where Davidson's behavior and Sarah's response would be discussed and analyzed throughout the base within hours. Military communities were notorious for rapid information sharing, and an incident involving a company commander being disabled by a junior enlisted soldier would become the subject of intense speculation and investigation. Staff Sergeant Monica Rodriguez, a military police sergeant who had been eating breakfast at a nearby table, approached the situation with the professional assessment of someone trained to evaluate confrontations and determine appropriate responses. Her observation of the incident had been complete and unobstructed, providing her with a clear understanding of both Davidson's inappropriate behavior and Sarah's defensive response. Captain Davidson, Rodriguez said in the tone of voice that military police used when taking control of situations, "It appears you require medical attention. I recommend reporting to the aid station immediately." Her suggestion was phrased as professional advice, but her positioning and demeanor made it clear that she was prepared to ensure Davidson's compliance if necessary. Davidson's expression showed his struggle to maintain authority in a situation where he had been completely outmaneuvered by someone he had attempted to victimize. His damaged wrist required medical attention, but seeking treatment would involve explaining how the injury had occurred, which would inevitably lead to questions about his behavior toward Sarah. "This isn't over," Davidson said, directing his comment toward Sarah while attempting to project the kind of authority he was accustomed to using for intimidation. His threat was undermined by his obvious pain and the presence of 178 witnesses who had observed his inappropriate behavior and its consequences. Sarah looked up at Davidson with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the encounter, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that Chen Wei had taught her to project in the aftermath of defensive action. "Sir, I certainly hope it is." Her response was respectful in form, but carried an undertone that suggested Davidson would be well advised to reconsider any thoughts of retaliation. The mess hall remained silent as Davidson made his way toward the exit, his departure observed by every soldier present. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the room, punctuated by the occasional grunt of pain as movement aggravated his injured wrist. His exit marked the end of the immediate confrontation, but the beginning of consequences that would ripple through the command structure of Fort Campbell for months to come. As the mess hall slowly returned to normal activity levels, Sarah found herself the center of attention in ways that she had hoped to avoid throughout her military service. Soldiers at nearby tables watched her with expressions that ranged from admiration to curiosity to something approaching awe, while whispered conversations began to spread details of what had just occurred throughout the room. Sarah returned to her technical manual, attempting to resume the quiet routine that had been interrupted by Davidson's inappropriate behavior. But she understood that the events of the morning had fundamentally changed her status at Fort Campbell, transforming her from an unnoticed communications specialist into someone whose capabilities would be the subject of intense speculation and interest. The techniques she had used to disable Davidson were not secret or classified, but they were sufficiently unusual and effective that their employment by a junior enlisted soldier would raise questions about her background and training. Sarah realized that the careful anonymity she had maintained during her military service was probably ending, replaced by attention that would require careful management to avoid complications that could affect her career and her ability to serve effectively. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached Sarah's table as the mess hall's activity level returned to something approaching normal, her expression showing the professional interest of someone who recognized that the incident she had witnessed was far more significant than a simple confrontation between soldiers. "Private Chen," Rodriguez said, settling into the chair that Davidson had vacated, "that was some impressive crisis management. Mind if I ask where you learned techniques like that?" Her question was posed with the curiosity of a fellow professional rather than the suspicion of someone conducting an investigation, but Sarah understood that her answer could have implications for how the incident would be reported and investigated. Sarah looked up from her manual, recognizing that Rodriguez's question represented the beginning of official interest in her background and capabilities. The military police sergeant was clearly intelligent and observant, and her presence at the scene meant that any official investigation would include testimony from someone with law enforcement training and experience. "Family background, Sergeant," Sarah replied, providing accurate information while avoiding details that might complicate her situation. "My grandfather taught me some self-defense techniques when I was growing up." Her answer was truthful but carefully limited, acknowledging her training without revealing the extent or nature of her capabilities. Rodriguez nodded with the understanding of someone who recognized that Sarah's answer provided essential information while maintaining appropriate boundaries about personal background. Military personnel came from diverse civilian experiences, and it wasn't unusual for soldiers to possess skills that weren't reflected in their official military occupational specialties. "Well, those are some very effective self-defense techniques," Rodriguez said with appreciation that reflected her professional assessment of Sarah's performance. "Captain Davidson definitely needed to learn about appropriate professional boundaries, and it looks like you provided him with a very educational experience." Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's characterization of the incident as professional boundary enforcement rather than assault or insubordination, understanding that the military police sergeant's perspective would be influential in determining how the situation was officially categorized and investigated. "I hope Captain Davidson's injury isn't too serious," Sarah said, demonstrating the kind of concern for Davidson's welfare that would be expected from a professional soldier while avoiding any admission of excessive force or inappropriate response to his behavior. Rodriguez smiled with the understanding of someone who had dealt with similar situations throughout her military career. "I'm sure Captain Davidson will receive excellent medical care and hopefully some valuable education about appropriate conduct. The aid station staff are very experienced with treating various types of training injuries." The conversation between Sarah and Rodriguez was observed by soldiers throughout the mess hall, many of whom were straining to overhear details that might provide additional information about the incident they had witnessed. The presence of military police indicated that the situation was being taken seriously by command authority, while Rodriguez's relaxed and professional demeanor suggested that Sarah wasn't being treated as a suspect in a criminal investigation. As Rodriguez prepared to leave, she provided Sarah with information that would prove crucial in the coming days and weeks. "Private Chen, you should probably expect some follow-up questions from various people about this morning's incident. Standard procedure when there's any kind of confrontation involving injury. My advice is to be completely honest about what happened and focus on the facts rather than interpretation or speculation." Sarah understood that Rodriguez was providing unofficial guidance about how to handle the investigation that would inevitably follow Davidson's medical treatment. Military justice proceedings required clear documentation of incidents, and Sarah's responses to official questions would determine whether the situation was treated as justified self-defense or as an assault requiring disciplinary action. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate the advice," Sarah replied, recognizing Rodriguez's professionalism and the value of having an experienced military police officer who had witnessed the entire incident and understood its context. As Rodriguez left the mess hall, Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that her military service had just taken a dramatic turn that would require careful navigation to avoid career-damaging consequences. The techniques Chen Wei had taught her had proven effective in protecting her from Davidson's inappropriate behavior, but their use had also revealed capabilities that would inevitably attract attention from command authority and fellow soldiers. The remaining soldiers in the mess hall continued to observe Sarah with varying degrees of curiosity and speculation, their conversations creating a buzz of interest that indicated the incident was already becoming the subject of widespread discussion throughout the base. Sarah understood that within hours every soldier at Fort Campbell would have heard some version of the story about the communications specialist who had broken a company commander's wrist in response to inappropriate behavior. Some of the attention Sarah was receiving came from female soldiers who had witnessed Davidson's defeat with obvious satisfaction and approval. Their expressions suggested that Sarah had accomplished something they had wished for but never believed possible, demonstrating that predatory behavior could be met with decisive resistance rather than passive endurance. Male soldiers' reactions were more varied, ranging from admiration for Sarah's skills to concern about the implications of a junior enlisted soldier disabling a company commander. Some appeared to be reassessing their own behavior and assumptions about female soldiers' capabilities, while others seemed worried about how the incident might affect military hierarchy and discipline. Sarah finished her breakfast and prepared to leave the mess hall, understanding that her day would likely include interactions with command personnel who would want detailed explanations of the morning's events. She gathered her technical manual and personal items, maintaining the same calm professionalism that had characterized her response to Davidson's inappropriate behavior. As she stood to leave, several female soldiers approached her table with expressions that mixed gratitude, admiration and curiosity about her background and training. Their attention was flattering but also concerning, as Sarah realized that her desire for anonymity during military service was probably ending permanently. "Private Chen," said Specialist Lisa Martinez, a logistics specialist who had been sitting at a nearby table during the incident, "that was absolutely amazing. I don't think anyone has ever stood up to Captain Davidson like that before. Where did you learn to do that?" Her question reflected the curiosity of someone who had clearly been bothered by Davidson's behavior but felt powerless to respond effectively. Sarah understood that Martinez's question represented the interest of multiple female soldiers who had observed Davidson's defeat and wondered whether similar capabilities might be available to them. The attention was flattering but also potentially problematic, as Sarah realized that her actions might be interpreted as an invitation to provide self-defense training that could lead to complications she hadn't considered. "Like I told Sergeant Rodriguez, my grandfather taught me some basic self-defense techniques," Sarah replied, maintaining the same careful boundaries about her background while acknowledging the interest of soldiers who had clearly been affected by Davidson's behavior.
The important thing is that inappropriate conduct shouldn't be tolerated, regardless of rank or position. Martinez nodded enthusiastically, her expression showing the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed justice being served in a situation where she had felt powerless to intervene. "Well, I hope Captain Davidson learned something important about respecting people's boundaries. It's about time someone showed him that his behavior has consequences." Sarah appreciated Martinez's perspective while understanding that the consequences of the morning's incident were only beginning to unfold. Davidson's medical treatment would require explanation, which would lead to official investigation, which would inevitably involve detailed scrutiny of both his behavior and her response. The fact that 178 soldiers had witnessed the entire incident meant that there would be abundant testimony about what had occurred. But Sarah understood that official military justice procedures required careful documentation and analysis that could take weeks or months to complete. As Sarah left the mess hall, she reflected on the morning's events and their implications for her remaining military service. Chen Wei had prepared her to defend herself against physical threats, but he had also warned her about the complications that could arise from revealing capabilities that others didn't understand or expect. Military organizations valued predictability and clear chain of command, and soldiers who displayed unexpected capabilities often found themselves subject to additional scrutiny and different expectations. The walk from the mess hall to the communications center provided Sarah with time to consider how she would handle the questions and attention that would inevitably follow the incident with Davidson. Her grandfather had taught her that defensive action was only the beginning of managing dangerous situations, and that the aftermath often required as much skill and judgment as the initial response. Sarah's technical duties that morning provided welcome distraction from the implications of the mess hall incident, allowing her to focus on equipment maintenance and communication procedures that required analytical thinking rather than speculation about future consequences. Her work was important and challenging, creating the kind of mental engagement that helped her maintain perspective about the morning's events. However, the communication center's radio traffic included references to a medical emergency involving a company commander, indicating that Davidson's injury was being treated seriously by medical personnel and command authority. Sarah understood that his medical treatment would require detailed documentation about the cause of his injury, which would inevitably lead to official questions about her role in the incident. The morning passed quickly as Sarah immersed herself in technical responsibilities, but she remained aware that her situation at Fort Campbell had changed permanently. The quiet anonymity that had characterized her first 6 months of military service was ending, replaced by attention and scrutiny that would require careful management to avoid complications that could affect her career and her ability to serve effectively. As she worked, Sarah thought about Chen Wei and the training he had provided, recognizing that the techniques he had taught her had proven their value in exactly the kind of situation he had prepared her to handle. But she also understood that using those techniques had revealed capabilities that would be difficult to explain or minimize, creating challenges that her grandfather's training hadn't specifically addressed. The communication center's morning shift ended with Sarah having successfully maintained focus on her professional duties despite the distraction of the mess hall incident and its implications. Her supervisors had not mentioned the morning's events, suggesting that official information about Davidson's injury hadn't yet reached the communication unit's command structure, but Sarah understood that such information typically moved slowly through military bureaucracy before resulting in official action. As Sarah prepared to leave the communication center for lunch, she reflected on the fact that her military service had been fundamentally altered by a single incident that had lasted less than 30 seconds. The techniques Chen Wei had taught her had protected her from Davidson's inappropriate behavior, but they had also transformed her from an anonymous communications specialist into someone whose capabilities would be the subject of ongoing interest and speculation. The events of the morning had validated her grandfather's training while creating new challenges that would require the same careful judgment and disciplined response that he had taught her to apply to physical threats. Sarah understood that the coming days and weeks would test not just her ability to handle official investigation and command scrutiny, but also her capacity to manage attention and expectations from fellow soldiers who had witnessed capabilities they didn't understand. As she walked across Fort Campbell toward the dining facility for lunch, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that she had successfully defended herself against inappropriate behavior while potentially creating complications that would affect the remainder of her military service. The balance between those outcomes would depend largely on how skillfully she managed the investigation and attention that were certain to follow, applying the same principles of careful judgment and controlled response that Chen Wei had taught her to use in all challenging situations. The news of Captain Davidson's broken wrist spread through Fort Campbell with the velocity that only military gossip could achieve. By noon, every barracks, every office and every training area buzzed with whispered conversations about the communications specialist who had hospitalized a company commander with her bare hands. The story grew with each telling, transforming from a simple self-defense incident into something approaching legend. Major William Harrison received the first official report about the incident while reviewing training schedules in his office at division headquarters. The initial medical notification simply stated that Captain Davidson had sustained a fractured wrist requiring emergency treatment, but the follow-up report from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez contained details that immediately captured Harrison's complete attention. Harrison had served 22 years in the Army, including multiple combat deployments and extensive experience with military investigations. He had seen soldiers with various backgrounds and capabilities, but Rodriguez's description of Private Chen's response to Davidson's behavior suggested training that extended far beyond standard military instruction. The precision and control described in the report indicated expertise that was rarely seen outside specialized military units or extensive civilian martial arts training. The Major's first instinct was to treat the incident as a standard disciplinary matter requiring investigation and appropriate administrative action. Davidson's behavior, as described by Rodriguez and multiple witnesses, clearly violated Army regulations regarding professional conduct and sexual harassment. Chen's response appeared to be justified self-defense against unwanted physical contact, making it unlikely that she would face serious disciplinary consequences. However, the technical aspects of Chen's defensive techniques raised questions that extended beyond simple disciplinary procedures. The ability to disable a larger, stronger opponent with such precision and control suggested training that might be relevant to military operations beyond communications support. Harrison found himself wondering whether the Army was fully utilizing Chen's capabilities and whether her background might reveal additional skills that could benefit her unit and the broader military mission. Harrison's curiosity about Chen's background intensified when he reviewed her personnel file and found the standard documentation that revealed very little about her civilian experiences or family history. Her enlistment paperwork showed excellent academic performance, clean criminal background checks, and standard psychological evaluations that indicated stability and reliability. Nothing in the official records suggested the kind of specialized training that could produce the capabilities Rodriguez had described. The Major's investigation took an unexpected turn when he contacted the recruiting station that had processed Chen's enlistment to request additional background information. Sergeant First Class Janet Murphy, the recruiter who had worked with Chen, remembered her clearly and provided details that hadn't been included in the standard documentation. Murphy explained that Chen had impressed her with exceptional physical fitness scores and an unusual level of composure during the stress evaluations that were part of the enlistment process. More significantly, Chen had mentioned during informal conversation that her grandfather had taught her martial arts but had been modest about her level of training and had specifically requested assignment to technical specialties rather than combat roles. The recruiter's recollection suggested that Chen had deliberately underplayed her physical capabilities during the enlistment process, choosing military occupational specialties that would keep her away from situations where combat skills might be relevant. This pattern indicated someone who possessed significant capabilities but preferred to avoid situations where those abilities might become necessary or draw unwanted attention. Harrison's investigation expanded when he consulted with Master Sergeant David Kim, the senior martial arts instructor for the division's combatives program. Kim had extensive experience in multiple fighting disciplines and had served as a military police investigator before transitioning to training duties. His expertise in both martial arts and military procedures made him the logical choice for evaluating the technical aspects of Chen's defensive response. Kim's analysis of Rodriguez's report and witness statements revealed techniques that he immediately recognized as sophisticated and professionally executed. The joint manipulation and pressure point application described by witnesses indicated training in traditional martial arts styles that emphasized precision and control rather than brute force. These were not techniques typically taught in military combatives or civilian self-defense classes. The Master Sergeant's assessment suggested that Chen had received extensive training in Chinese martial arts, specifically systems that had been developed for military and law enforcement applications rather than sport or fitness. The level of skill required to execute such techniques under stress indicated years of disciplined practice under expert instruction far exceeding anything that could be learned through casual study or recreational classes. Kim's evaluation raised additional questions about Chen's background and the extent of her training. If she possessed such sophisticated martial arts skills, what other capabilities might she have that weren't reflected in her military records? Had the Army missed opportunities to utilize her training in roles that could benefit from specialized physical skills? Were there security implications to having personnel with undocumented combat capabilities serving in sensitive technical positions? Harrison's investigation attracted the attention of Colonel Patricia Wells, the division's intelligence officer, when she reviewed routine security briefings that included summaries of unusual incidents involving military personnel. Wells had spent 15 years in military intelligence, including assignments that required evaluating personnel for specialized operations and assessing potential security risks posed by individuals with undocumented capabilities. Wells' interest in Chen's case was driven by standard procedures that required investigation whenever military personnel demonstrated skills or knowledge that weren't documented in their official records. While Chen's defensive response appeared to be completely justified, the sophistication of her techniques raised questions about her training background and potential connections to organizations or individuals outside normal military channels. The colonel's initial review of Chen's case focused on security implications rather than disciplinary concerns. Military personnel with undocumented combat training could potentially pose security risks if their loyalties were divided or if their capabilities had been acquired through questionable associations. Standard security protocols required thorough investigation of such situations to ensure that national security interests weren't compromised. Wells' investigation began with expanded background checks that went beyond the standard screening procedures used during Chen's enlistment. These deeper investigations included contacts with law enforcement agencies, immigration services, and intelligence databases that maintained records of individuals with potential connections to foreign governments or organizations. The expanded background investigation revealed information about Chen's family that hadn't been included in her standard military documentation. Her grandfather Chen Wei had immigrated to the United States in 1962 from Hong Kong, where he had apparently been involved in activities that required him to leave the region quickly and permanently. Immigration records suggested that Chen Wei had received assistance from American intelligence agencies during his relocation, indicating possible cooperation with U.S. government operations. Wells' investigation uncovered classified documents that revealed Chen Wei's background as a former operative for British intelligence services operating in Hong Kong during the period leading up to his immigration. His specialized training in traditional Chinese martial arts had been utilized for covert operations that required individuals capable of operating in Asian cultural environments while possessing capabilities that exceeded those of conventional intelligence personnel. The discovery that Chen's grandfather had been connected to intelligence operations immediately elevated the significance of her case beyond routine disciplinary investigation. Military personnel with family connections to intelligence services required additional security screening to ensure that their loyalties were undivided and that their access to military information didn't pose potential security risks. However, the investigation also revealed that Chen Wei's cooperation with Western intelligence agencies had been extensive and valuable, resulting in his successful extraction and relocation when his cover was compromised. His subsequent life in the United States had been completely civilian, with no indications of continued intelligence activities or questionable associations. The martial arts training he had provided to his granddaughter appeared to be purely defensive, aimed at ensuring her personal safety rather than preparing her for any kind of operational activities. Wells's security investigation concluded that Chen posed no threat to military interests and that her family background actually suggested loyalty to American values and institutions. However, the investigation also revealed that Chen possessed capabilities that could be valuable for specialized military operations if she were willing to consider assignments that utilized her unique training and background. The colonel's report attracted the attention of Lieutenant Colonel Michael Torres, who commanded a special operations unit that frequently required personnel with unconventional capabilities and cultural knowledge. Torres had extensive experience in identifying and recruiting individuals whose backgrounds provided skills that weren't available through standard military training programs. Torres' interest in Chen was driven by operational requirements rather than security concerns. His unit frequently conducted missions that required personnel capable of operating in diverse cultural environments while possessing advanced physical capabilities that could be essential for mission success. Chen's combination of technical skills, martial arts training, and Asian cultural background made her potentially valuable for operations that required individuals who could blend into civilian populations while maintaining capabilities that exceeded those of typical cover personnel. The lieutenant colonel's evaluation of Chen's case involved consultation with specialists who understood the operational requirements for unconventional warfare and the challenges of recruiting personnel with appropriate combinations of skills and reliability. Chen's military service record indicated exceptional performance in technical duties, strong psychological stability, and the kind of quiet professionalism that was essential for personnel who might be required to operate independently under challenging conditions. Torres' assessment suggested that Chen might be an ideal candidate for specialized training that would prepare her for assignments requiring technical expertise combined with advanced physical capabilities. However, such recruitment would require careful approach to determine her interest in expanded military service and her willingness to accept assignments that would utilize capabilities she had apparently preferred to keep private. The investigation into Chen's background and capabilities had transformed from routine disciplinary review into comprehensive evaluation for potential special operations recruitment. Multiple senior officers were now involved in assessing her qualifications and determining how the military could best utilize her unique combination of skills and experience. Meanwhile, Chen continued her regular duties in the communications center, apparently unaware that her response to Davidson's inappropriate behavior had triggered extensive investigation and evaluation by senior command personnel. Her daily routine remained focused on technical responsibilities, maintaining the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her service since arriving at Fort Campbell. The Communications Center Supervisor, Staff Sergeant Robert Martinez, had noticed increased attention to Chen's work performance from senior personnel who rarely showed interest in routine technical operations. Military personnel from various units had begun requesting information about Chen's capabilities and reliability, suggesting that her reputation was spreading beyond the immediate incident with Davidson.
Martinez found himself fielding questions about Chen's technical competence, her interactions with fellow soldiers, and her overall performance as a communications specialist. The inquiries came from personnel whose ranks and positions indicated serious official interest, rather than casual curiosity about the incident that had made Chen temporarily famous throughout the base. The staff sergeant's assessment of Chen was consistently positive, describing her as exceptionally competent in technical duties, completely reliable in her performance, and professional in all her interactions with military personnel. Her work quality exceeded requirements, her attitude remained positive despite increased attention from the Davidson incident, and her overall contribution to unit effectiveness was exemplary. However, Martinez also noted that Chen had consistently avoided opportunities for advancement or assignment to positions that would have increased her visibility within the military structure. She had declined suggestions for leadership training, shown no interest in competing for accelerated promotion opportunities, and generally maintained a profile that emphasized competence without seeking recognition or expanded responsibilities. Chen's apparent preference for anonymity and routine technical duties contrasted sharply with the ambitions typically displayed by soldiers with her level of capability and reliability. Most personnel with her qualifications actively sought advancement opportunities, leadership positions, and assignments that would enhance their military careers. Chen's contentment with routine duties suggested either unusual modesty or deliberate strategy to avoid attention that might complicate her military service. The investigation into Chen's background had also attracted attention from civilian agencies that maintained interest in individuals with specialized capabilities and potential connections to intelligence operations. Federal agents had contacted Fort Campbell security personnel to request information about Chen's activities and associations, indicating that her case had implications beyond purely military concerns. These civilian inquiries focused on security clearance issues rather than criminal investigation, reflecting standard procedures for evaluating personnel who might require access to classified information or assignment to sensitive positions. Chen's family background and demonstrated capabilities had apparently triggered automatic reviews by agencies responsible for protecting national security interests. The expanding investigation had created a situation where Chen's future military service would likely involve choices about career directions that she hadn't anticipated when she enlisted for technical training. Her response to Davidson's inappropriate behavior had revealed capabilities that made her potentially valuable for assignments far beyond communications support, but such opportunities would require decisions about how much attention and responsibility she was willing to accept. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a civilian analyst who specialized in evaluating military personnel for unconventional assignments, was contacted to provide psychological assessment of Chen's suitability for expanded responsibilities. Walsh had extensive experience in identifying individuals who possessed both the capabilities and temperament required for assignments that involved significant autonomy and potential danger. Walsh's evaluation involved reviewing Chen's complete military record, including psychological assessments from her enlistment and performance evaluations from her training and operational assignments. The analysis also included witness statements from the Davidson incident and assessments from personnel who had worked with Chen in various capacities. The psychological profile that emerged from Walsh's evaluation described Chen as exceptionally stable, reliable, and capable of maintaining performance under pressure. Her response to Davidson's inappropriate behavior demonstrated excellent judgment, appropriate use of force, and the kind of controlled decision-making that was essential for personnel who might face complex situations requiring independent action. However, Walsh's assessment also noted that Chen appeared to have deliberately chosen military service that would minimize exposure to situations requiring the specialized capabilities she possessed. This pattern suggested either lack of confidence in her abilities or strategic decision to avoid complications that might arise from revealing skills that others didn't understand or expect.
The psychological evaluation concluded that Chen possessed both the capabilities and temperament for expanded military responsibilities, but that successful recruitment would require understanding her motivations and addressing any concerns she might have about accepting assignments that would utilize her unique training and background. Walsh's assessment recommended careful approach to Chen about potential career opportunities, emphasizing the value of her contributions while respecting her apparent preference for maintaining control over how her capabilities were utilized. The evaluation suggested that Chen was likely to respond positively to opportunities that matched her skills with meaningful missions, but would probably resist assignments that seemed to exploit her abilities without regard for her personal preferences or career goals. The accumulation of positive assessments from multiple evaluators had created consensus among senior personnel that Chen represented exceptional potential for military service beyond her current technical role. However, the investigation had also revealed that successful utilization of her capabilities would require sensitivity to her background and respect for her apparent desire to maintain some control over her military career trajectory. Colonel Wells' final report on Chen's case recommended that she be approached about opportunities for expanded military service, but emphasized the importance of voluntary participation rather than involuntary assignment to specialized roles. The report noted that Chen's unique combination of skills, reliability, and cultural background made her potentially valuable for missions that required personnel capable of operating independently in challenging environments. The recommendation included suggestions for gradual introduction to expanded responsibilities, allowing Chen to demonstrate her capabilities and assess her interest in assignments beyond routine technical duties. This approach would provide opportunities to utilize her specialized training while respecting her apparent preference for making informed decisions about her military career. The investigation that had begun as routine review of a disciplinary incident had evolved into comprehensive evaluation of a soldier whose capabilities suggested potential for contributions far beyond anything indicated in her original military documentation. Multiple senior officers and civilian specialists had concluded that Chen possessed exceptional qualifications for specialized military service, but successful recruitment would require approaches that respected her autonomy and addressed her concerns about expanded responsibilities. As the investigation proceeded through official channels, Chen continued her routine duties, apparently unaware that her future military service might soon involve opportunities and challenges far different from the technical responsibilities she had originally sought. The consequences of her defensive response to Davidson's inappropriate behavior were still unfolding, creating possibilities that would require careful consideration of how her unique capabilities could best serve military objectives while respecting her personal preferences and career goals. The secure conference room at Fort Campbell's intelligence facility had seen many classified briefings, but none quite like the one convening at 0800 hours on a gray Thursday morning. Colonel Patricia Wells sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, surrounded by personnel whose combined expertise represented decades of special operations experience and strategic planning. The subject of their discussion was still performing routine communications duties, completely unaware that her future hung in the balance of this high-level meeting. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Torres reviewed the comprehensive file that had grown remarkably thick in just 72 hours since the Davidson incident. The investigation had uncovered layers of capability and background that painted a picture of someone whose potential military value far exceeded anything suggested by her current assignment. Torres had spent years identifying and recruiting unconventional assets for operations that required capabilities beyond standard military training, but Chen's combination of skills, background, and psychological profile represented something genuinely unique. Major William Harrison opened the briefing by summarizing the administrative aspects of the case, emphasizing that the original disciplinary matter had been resolved in Chen's favor with no charges filed against her. Davidson's medical treatment had confirmed a clean fracture of the radius requiring 6 weeks of immobilization, consistent with the precise joint manipulation techniques witnessed by multiple personnel. More significantly, Davidson's company had been quietly reassigned to different leadership while he underwent mandatory counseling for professional conduct violations. The major's summary emphasized that Chen's response had been both legally justified and tactically flawless, demonstrating exactly the kind of controlled decision-making and precise execution that characterized elite military personnel. Her behavior following the incident had been exemplary, showing no signs of inappropriate aggression or concerning psychological responses to the stress of injuring a superior officer. Dr. Jennifer Walsh presented her psychological evaluation with clinical precision, outlining personality traits and behavioral patterns that suggested exceptional suitability for independent operations requiring high levels of responsibility and judgment. Chen's psychological profile indicated someone capable of operating under extreme pressure while maintaining ethical standards and mission focus. Her apparent preference for anonymity suggested strategic thinking rather than lack of confidence, indicating someone who understood the value of controlling information about her capabilities. Walsh's assessment included detailed analysis of Chen's response patterns during the Davidson incident, noting the calculated escalation of force that achieved mission objectives with minimal collateral damage. The precision of her techniques suggested extensive training in threat assessment and response protocols that exceeded anything taught in standard military or civilian self-defense programs. The psychologist's evaluation concluded that Chen possessed both the mental resilience and moral character required for assignments involving significant autonomy and potential lethality. However, Walsh emphasized that successful recruitment would require approaches that respected Chen's apparent desire to make informed decisions about how her capabilities were utilized rather than simply accepting assignment to roles chosen by others. Master Sergeant David Kim provided technical analysis of the martial arts techniques Chen had employed, describing capabilities that represented mastery of traditional Chinese fighting systems rarely seen outside specialized military or intelligence applications. Kim's background in both combatives instruction and military police investigation provided unique perspective on the sophistication of Chen's defensive response. Kim's analysis revealed that Chen's techniques incorporated elements from multiple traditional martial arts systems, suggesting comprehensive training that had integrated various approaches into a unified combat methodology. The precision required to disable Davidson without causing permanent injury indicated not just technical skill but the kind of controlled application that characterized professional training rather than recreational study. The Master Sergeant's assessment included comparisons with techniques used by special operations personnel and foreign military specialists, noting that Chen's capabilities appeared to exceed those of most personnel who had received formal military combatives training. Her grandfather's background in intelligence operations provided context for understanding how such sophisticated techniques might have been transmitted outside normal military channels. Kim concluded that Chen's martial arts capabilities represented strategic military assets that could provide significant advantages in operations requiring personnel capable of neutralizing threats while maintaining operational security. Her demonstrated ability to apply precise force under pressure suggested reliability that would be essential for assignments where excessive response could compromise mission objectives or create diplomatic complications. Intelligence Specialist Captain Amanda Foster presented classified information about Chen Wei's background and his connections to British and American intelligence operations during the Cold War period. Foster's research had uncovered operational records that revealed Chen Wei's role in missions that had provided significant strategic value to Western intelligence agencies, including operations that had prevented Chinese communist expansion into critical Southeast Asian territories. Foster's briefing included details about techniques and training methodologies that Chen Wei had acquired through his intelligence work capabilities that had apparently been transmitted to his granddaughter through private instruction over many years. The intelligence records suggested that Chen Wei had possessed extensive knowledge of covert operations, cultural infiltration techniques, and specialized combat methods that had made him exceptionally valuable for missions requiring deep cultural knowledge combined with advanced physical capabilities. The captain's analysis indicated that Sarah Chen had inherited not just martial arts techniques, but potentially comprehensive understanding of operational security, threat assessment, and cultural adaptation that could prove valuable for modern special operations. Her grandfather's training had apparently emphasized principles that remained relevant for contemporary military applications, suggesting that Chen possessed foundational knowledge that could be rapidly developed for current operational requirements. Foster concluded that Chen's family background represented significant potential intelligence assets that had been preserved through private transmission rather than institutional training. Her grandfather's loyalty to American interests, combined with his granddaughter's demonstrated reliability and capability, suggested opportunities for utilizing inherited expertise that might not be available through conventional recruitment and training programs. Colonel Wells synthesized the various assessments into a strategic recommendation that balanced military requirements with respect for Chen's autonomy and career preferences. Wells' experience in personnel evaluation and operational planning provided perspective on how Chen's unique qualifications could be integrated into existing special operations structures while addressing potential challenges related to her apparent preference for controlled exposure of her capabilities. Wells' recommendation emphasized gradual introduction to expanded responsibilities through voluntary participation in training programs and evaluation exercises that would allow Chen to demonstrate her capabilities while assessing her interest in specialized assignments. This approach would provide opportunities to develop her potential while respecting her demonstrated preference for making informed decisions about her military service. The Colonel's strategic assessment included analysis of operational requirements that could benefit from Chen's unique combination of technical expertise, cultural background, and physical capabilities. Several current and projected missions required personnel capable of operating in Asian cultural environments while maintaining advanced technical and combat skills, making Chen potentially valuable for assignments that conventional special operations personnel couldn't effectively execute. Wells concluded that Chen represented exceptional potential for contributions to special operations objectives but emphasized that successful utilization would require recruitment approaches that acknowledged her intelligence and respected her apparent strategic thinking about career management. The Colonel recommended offering Chen opportunities for expanded service while ensuring that she retained significant control over assignment decisions and operational parameters. Lieutenant Colonel Torres outlined specific operational requirements that could benefit from Chen's capabilities, describing scenarios where her unique qualifications would provide strategic advantages unavailable through conventional personnel assignments. Torres' experience in unconventional warfare and cultural operations provided insight into how Chen's background could address current operational challenges facing special operations units. Torres described missions requiring personnel capable of operating in civilian environments while maintaining capabilities that exceeded those of typical cover personnel. Chen's combination of technical skills, cultural knowledge, and advanced physical training made her potentially ideal for assignments requiring individuals who could blend into diverse populations while possessing capabilities that could prove decisive in crisis situations. The Lieutenant Colonel's operational analysis included assessment of training requirements that would prepare Chen for expanded responsibilities while building on capabilities she already possessed. Rather than requiring complete retraining, Chen could potentially be prepared for specialized assignments through focused instruction that enhanced her existing skills while providing specific knowledge required for particular mission parameters. Torres emphasized that Chen's voluntary participation would be essential for successful integration into special operations activities. Personnel with her level of capability and intelligence required approaches that emphasized partnership rather than subordination, ensuring that mission objectives aligned with personal motivations and professional goals. The briefing participants reached consensus that Chen represented exceptional potential for military service beyond her current technical role, but that successful recruitment would require careful approaches that respected her demonstrated intelligence and strategic thinking. The group agreed that Chen should be offered opportunities for expanded service through voluntary participation in evaluation and training programs that would allow gradual development of her potential while maintaining her autonomy over career decisions. Colonel Wells assigned responsibility for initial contact with Chen to Major Harrison, whose role in the original investigation and his reputation for fair dealing with subordinate personnel made him the logical choice for approaches that would require sensitivity and professionalism. Harrison's initial conversations with Chen would focus on career development opportunities rather than specific operational assignments, allowing her to consider expanded service without pressure or detailed commitments. The Major's instructions included emphasis on transparency about the military's interest in Chen's capabilities while respecting operational security requirements that limited detailed discussion of specific missions or assignments. Harrison would present opportunities for advanced training and evaluation while allowing Chen to make informed decisions about her willingness to explore expanded military service. The strategic planning session concluded with establishment of timeline and protocols for approaching Chen about potential special operations recruitment. The participants agreed that successful integration of Chen's capabilities into military operations would require patient development of her interest and voluntary participation in training programs that demonstrated the value of expanded service while respecting her autonomy and career preferences. Meanwhile, Chen continued her routine duties in the communications center, maintaining focus on technical responsibilities while remaining unaware of the high-level discussions that were determining her future military career options. Her daily routine included equipment maintenance, communication support for training exercises, and collaboration with fellow technical personnel who had grown accustomed to working with someone whose competence exceeded typical expectations. Staff Sergeant Martinez had noticed increased interest in Chen's performance from senior personnel but attributed the attention to ongoing investigation related to the Davidson incident rather than potential recruitment for specialized assignments. Martinez continued to provide positive assessments of Chen's technical capabilities and professional conduct, unaware that his evaluations were contributing to strategic decisions about her future military service. Chen's interactions with fellow soldiers had gradually returned to normal patterns as the immediate attention from the Davidson incident subsided.
However, she remained aware that her response to inappropriate behavior had permanently altered her status within the base community, transforming her from an anonymous technical specialist into someone whose capabilities were recognized and respected by personnel throughout Fort Campbell. The routine nature of Chen's daily responsibilities provided stability and normalcy, while senior personnel developed plans for offering her opportunities that would utilize her unique qualifications for military service beyond communications support. Her consistent performance in technical duties demonstrated the reliability and professionalism that would be essential for personnel considered for expanded responsibilities requiring high levels of trust and autonomy. Chen's apparent contentment with routine technical work contrasted with the career ambitions typically displayed by personnel with her level of capability, suggesting either unusual satisfaction with current assignments or strategic decisions to maintain low-profile service until better opportunities became available. Her response to potential recruitment opportunities would provide insight into her motivations and career goals that weren't evident from her current service patterns. Major Harrison began developing approaches for initial conversations with Chen about career development opportunities, recognizing that successful recruitment would require understanding her motivations and addressing any concerns she might have about expanded military service. Harrison's experience in personnel management and his observation of Chen's professional conduct provided foundation for approaches that would respect her intelligence while exploring her interest in assignments that would utilize her demonstrated capabilities. The Major's planning included consideration of Chen's apparent preference for making informed decisions about her military service, suggesting that recruitment approaches should emphasize transparency about opportunities while respecting her autonomy over career choices. Harrison understood that Chen's response to potential special operations recruitment would depend largely on how well initial conversations addressed her concerns and demonstrated respect for her strategic thinking about career management. Dr. Walsh's psychological assessment had indicated that Chen would likely respond positively to opportunities that matched her capabilities with meaningful missions, but would probably resist assignments that seemed to exploit her abilities without regard for her personal preferences. This analysis suggested that successful recruitment would require demonstrating how expanded military service could align with Chen's own goals while contributing to important national security objectives. The intelligence community's interest in Chen's capabilities had created additional complexity in recruitment planning, as multiple agencies sought to evaluate her potential for assignments that would utilize her unique combination of technical skills, cultural knowledge, and physical capabilities. However, military leadership had established clear protocols ensuring that Chen's recruitment decisions would be made within military channels rather than being influenced by civilian intelligence agencies. Colonel Wells' strategic oversight of Chen's case ensured that recruitment approaches would prioritize military objectives while respecting Chen's autonomy and career preferences. The colonel's experience in special operations personnel management provided perspective on how to successfully integrate exceptional individuals into military structures while maintaining the voluntary participation that was essential for personnel with Chen's level of capability and intelligence. The expanding recognition of Chen's potential had created opportunities for military service that she had never anticipated when enlisting for technical training, but it had also created responsibilities for senior personnel to ensure that recruitment approaches respected her demonstrated professionalism and strategic thinking. The balance between military requirements and individual autonomy would determine whether Chen's unique capabilities could be successfully utilized for national security objectives.
Chen's future military service would largely depend on how effectively senior personnel could demonstrate that expanded responsibilities would provide meaningful opportunities for contribution while respecting her apparent preference for maintaining control over how her capabilities were utilized. The approaching conversations between Chen and military leadership would determine whether her exceptional qualifications could be successfully integrated into special operations activities through voluntary participation that acknowledged her intelligence and respected her career goals. The stage was set for discussions that would fundamentally alter Chen's military career trajectory, transforming her from a communications specialist into a potential special operations asset whose unique background and demonstrated capabilities could provide strategic advantages for missions requiring exceptional personnel. However, the success of such transformation would depend entirely on Chen's voluntary agreement to accept expanded responsibilities that would utilize her grandfather's legacy while serving contemporary national security requirements. As Thursday afternoon approached, Major Harrison prepared for the most important recruitment conversation of his career, understanding that Chen's response would determine whether the military could successfully utilize capabilities that represented decades of specialized training and cultural knowledge. The upcoming meeting would require delicate balance between transparency about opportunities and respect for Chen's autonomy, setting the foundation for potential expansion of her military service into areas that would challenge her capabilities while honoring her grandfather's legacy of service to American interests. The Communications Center's afternoon shift provided Chen with routine technical responsibilities while senior personnel finalized plans for approaching her about career opportunities that would fundamentally change her military service. Her consistent focus on professional duties demonstrated the reliability that had convinced multiple evaluators of her suitability for expanded responsibilities, while her apparent satisfaction with current assignments suggested someone who made deliberate decisions about career trajectory, rather than simply accepting whatever opportunities became available. The convergence of Chen's exceptional capabilities, the military's operational requirements, and senior leadership's recognition of her potential had created a unique situation where individual recruitment decisions would have implications extending far beyond typical personnel assignments. Chen's response to upcoming opportunities would determine whether her grandfather's legacy of intelligence service could be continued through modern military applications that honored both family traditions and contemporary national security needs. The approaching conversations between Chen and military leadership represented a critical juncture where personal decisions would intersect with strategic requirements, creating possibilities for military service that could utilize exceptional capabilities while respecting individual autonomy and career preferences. The outcome would depend on Chen's assessment of whether expanded military service aligned with her own goals while contributing to missions that justified the risks and responsibilities that would accompany utilization of her unique qualifications. Major Harrison found Sarah Chen in the Communications Center during her afternoon shift, her attention focused on calibrating radio equipment with the methodical precision that had characterized all her technical work. The Major's arrival drew glances from other personnel, but Chen's concentration remained fixed on her tasks until Harrison cleared his throat softly and requested a private conversation. "Private Chen, when you have a moment, I'd like to discuss some career development opportunities that might interest you," Harrison said, his tone carefully neutral but carrying enough authority to indicate the conversation's importance. Chen completed her current calibration sequence before turning to face the Major, her expression alert but revealing nothing about her expectations for the discussion. The Major led Chen to a small conference room adjacent to the Communications Center, closing the door to ensure privacy for what would prove to be one of the most significant conversations of her military career. Harrison's approach had been carefully planned to respect Chen's demonstrated intelligence while introducing opportunities that could transform her service from routine technical duties into assignments that would challenge every aspect of her training and capability. "Private Chen," Harrison began, settling into a chair across from her, "your response to Captain Davidson's inappropriate behavior has drawn attention from senior personnel who believe your capabilities might be underutilized in your current assignment." His opening statement was direct but respectful, acknowledging her demonstrated skills while avoiding any suggestion that her technical work was inadequate or unimportant. Chen's expression remained composed as she absorbed Harrison's words, but her silence indicated careful consideration of implications that extended beyond simple career advancement. Her grandfather's training had taught her to evaluate unexpected opportunities with the same analytical caution she applied to potential threats, understanding that significant changes often carried consequences that weren't immediately apparent. "What kind of opportunities, sir?" Chen asked, her voice steady despite the growing realization that the Davidson incident had triggered developments far beyond anything she had anticipated. Her question was carefully phrased to gather information without committing to any particular response, maintaining the strategic thinking that had impressed every senior officer who had evaluated her case. Harrison explained that Chen's background investigation had revealed capabilities and qualifications that made her potentially valuable for assignments requiring specialized skills beyond standard military training. He emphasized that any expanded responsibilities would be completely voluntary, respecting her right to decline opportunities that didn't align with her career goals or personal preferences. The Major's explanation included general descriptions of special operations activities that required personnel with cultural knowledge, technical expertise, and physical capabilities that exceeded typical requirements. He avoided specific operational details while providing enough information for Chen to understand that the opportunities involved significant responsibility and potential risk that would require careful consideration. Chen listened without interruption as Harrison outlined possibilities for advanced training that would prepare her for assignments involving independent operation in challenging environments. The Major emphasized that such training would build on capabilities she already possessed rather than requiring complete reorientation of her military service, suggesting recognition of her existing qualifications rather than assumption that she needed fundamental redevelopment. "Sir, these opportunities sound like they would involve activities significantly different from communication support," Chen observed, her tone indicating neither enthusiasm nor rejection but careful assessment of what Harrison was proposing. Her response demonstrated the analytical thinking that had convinced senior personnel of her suitability for expanded responsibilities while maintaining appropriate caution about commitments she didn't fully understand. Harrison acknowledged that the assignments would indeed differ substantially from technical duties but emphasized that her communications expertise would remain valuable for operations requiring personnel capable of maintaining equipment and networks under challenging conditions. He explained that modern special operations increasingly required individuals who combined multiple capabilities rather than specialists with narrow focus areas. The Major's explanation included assurance that Chen would receive comprehensive training for any new responsibilities, working with instructors who understood her background and could develop her potential while respecting her demonstrated professionalism. Harrison emphasized that the military's interest in her capabilities reflected recognition of exceptional qualifications rather than desperate need that might compromise proper preparation or support. Chen's questions revealed sophisticated understanding of military operations and career implications that impressed Harrison with their depth and strategic thinking. She inquired about assignment duration, geographical requirements, support structures, and advancement opportunities with the thoroughness of someone who understood that informed decisions required comprehensive information about long-term implications. "Sir, would these assignments utilize knowledge that my grandfather taught me?" Chen asked directly, her question indicating awareness that her family background had been investigated and that her martial arts training was part of her evaluation for expanded responsibilities. Her willingness to address this topic suggested growing comfort with discussing capabilities she had previously kept private. Harrison confirmed that Chen's inherited knowledge would indeed be valuable for the types of assignments being considered, explaining that the military rarely encountered personnel with her unique combination of technical skills, cultural background, and specialized training. He emphasized that her grandfather's legacy represented strategic assets that could contribute to important national security objectives if she chose to make them available for military use. The Major's discussion included explanation of how Chen's capabilities would be integrated with modern operational requirements, ensuring that traditional techniques learned from her grandfather would be enhanced with contemporary technology and tactical doctrine. Harrison emphasized that successful special operations required both innovative approaches and proven methods, making Chen's inherited knowledge particularly valuable for missions requiring unconventional solutions. Chen's consideration of Harrison's proposal involved careful evaluation of how expanded military service would align with her personal goals while honoring her grandfather's legacy of service to American interests. Her questions revealed understanding that accepting such opportunities would fundamentally change her military career while creating responsibilities that would require capabilities she had hoped to keep private. After nearly an hour of discussion, Chen requested time to consider the opportunities Harrison had outlined, understanding that her decision would have implications extending far beyond her individual military service. The Major agreed to provide her with additional information and contact details for personnel who could answer technical questions about training requirements and operational parameters. "Sir, if I were to accept these opportunities, would I be continuing something my grandfather started?" Chen asked as their conversation concluded, her question revealing deeper understanding of how her family history connected to contemporary military requirements. Her inquiry suggested recognition that her decision involved not just personal career choices but potentially honoring traditions that extended across generations. Harrison's response emphasized that Chen's grandfather had indeed contributed significantly to American security interests, and that her service could continue that legacy through modern applications of inherited knowledge and capability. The Major explained that few personnel had opportunities to build directly on family traditions while serving current national security requirements, making Chen's potential contributions both personally meaningful and strategically valuable. Chen's final request was for complete transparency about risks and requirements associated with the proposed assignments, emphasizing her need to make informed decisions based on comprehensive understanding of what expanded service would involve. Harrison agreed to provide detailed briefings that would allow her to evaluate opportunities without pressure or incomplete information. The conversation concluded with Chen promising to provide her decision within 1 week, giving her time to consider implications while demonstrating respect for the military's operational planning requirements. Harrison's satisfaction with the discussion reflected his assessment that Chen was approaching the decision with exactly the thoughtful analysis that would be essential for success in expanded responsibilities. Over the following days, Chen continued her routine technical duties while processing the magnitude of opportunities Harrison had presented. Her consistent performance in communications work demonstrated the reliability that had convinced senior personnel of her suitability for specialized assignments, while her thoughtful consideration of the proposal showed the strategic thinking that would be essential for independent operations. Chen's decision-making process included consideration of how expanded military service would honor her grandfather's legacy while contributing to missions that aligned with her own values and career goals. Her evaluation of the opportunities revealed understanding that acceptance would require courage to embrace responsibilities that would challenge every aspect of her training and capability. On the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after her conversation with Harrison, Chen requested a meeting to provide her decision about the special operations opportunities. Her timing demonstrated respect for both her own decision-making process and the military's operational requirements, suggesting the kind of professional consideration that would characterize her approach to expanded responsibilities. "Sir," Chen said as she settled into the same conference room where their previous conversation had occurred, "I've decided to accept the training opportunities you described. I believe my grandfather would want his knowledge to continue serving American interests through my military service." Her decision was stated with quiet confidence that reflected careful consideration and commitment to excellence that had characterized her entire military career. Harrison's response combined professional satisfaction with recognition of the significance of Chen's decision for both her personal career and broader military capabilities. The Major explained that Chen's acceptance would initiate training processes that would prepare her for assignments requiring the unique combination of skills and knowledge that made her exceptionally valuable for specialized operations. The Major's explanation of next steps included timelines for advanced training that would enhance Chen's existing capabilities while providing specific skills required for independent operations in challenging environments. Harrison emphasized that her preparation would be comprehensive and carefully structured to ensure her success in assignments that would utilize every aspect of her exceptional qualifications. Chen's transformation from communications specialist to special operations asset would honor her grandfather's legacy while serving contemporary national security requirements through applications of inherited knowledge and modern military doctrine. Her decision represented successful integration of family traditions with professional military service, creating opportunities for contributions that would extend far beyond anything possible through routine technical duties. 6 months later, Chen stood in a classified briefing room receiving final instructions for her first independent assignment, her uniform now bearing insignia indicating Special Operations qualification and advanced technical certifications that reflected her expanded military role. The quiet communication specialist had become a strategic asset whose unique capabilities would serve missions requiring exceptional personnel. Her grandfather's teachings had found new expression through modern military applications, proving that traditional knowledge could address contemporary challenges when properly integrated with current operational requirements. Chen's success had validated the military's recognition of her potential while demonstrating that exceptional individuals could honor family legacies through service that transcended typical career boundaries. The captain who had attempted to assault her had inadvertently triggered recognition of capabilities that would serve national security interests far beyond anything that could have been achieved through routine military service. Chen's defensive response had revealed qualifications that transformed her from an overlooked enlisted soldier into someone whose contributions would influence operations requiring the exceptional combination of skills and knowledge that only she possessed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.